Welcome back to Passionately Catholic. Today, let's take a look at this big switch that happens when we fall into sin. And of course, this always happens. This happens to all of us, of course, right? But we don't want this to happen, but there's this tension that we experience in terms of hitting the temptation. And then sometimes we don't fall into the temptation, and sometimes we do. And sometimes we resist the temptation, and even for a while, and then may eventually succumb and fall into that temptation, right? So let's consider really what happens. Like when we're in the moment of temptation, prior to the sin, like how does the devil, how does the temptation, how does Satan work in that realm? Well, he's all like, oh, it's not such a big deal. You know, there's no real problem here. It's just one little thing. It's no big deal, right? Satan totally downplays the temptation. That's the whole perspective. Whereas on the other side, it feels like, it's not true, but it feels sometimes like God's being really rigid, and there's all these rules and these commandments, and it's just too hard, and oh, I just can't do it. And it's like we get the impression, like there's this lie that God really doesn't have our best interests at heart, that God doesn't really want what's best for us, and that can make the temptation even more alluring. And you know, the temptation and Satan, the demons, they're all like, oh, inviting and kind, and you know, it might feel like God is super firm, you know, and so we might be like, oh, forget that, you know, I can't live up to those standards, I can't live up to those commandments or what God expects of me. But here's the thing, once we give in to that temptation and we actually choose to sin, there's this radical flip that takes place at that moment. And this is where the truth really becomes evident. Why? Because what happens with Satan and the demons, then they become the accusers. Then they become, oh, look at what you've done. Look at how you've fallen. Look at how you're broken. You've fallen into sin. Now you can't turn back to God now. God's not going to love you. God's not going to take you back. You can't rise out of this. You can't overcome this. You might as well give in again. You might as well keep falling. You know, keep going away from God, rebelling against God. They just invite us to keep heading down their path, right? And so the true nature of them comes out. They go from soft and inviting to now the accuser and dragging us down even worse. But what does God do? What happens when we sin? Like it might seem to us before the sin, during the temptation, that God's too firm, that he's too challenging, that his commandments are too hard. And yet when we fall into the sin, God is just absolute and total pure, and he is this always anyway. He's pure love. It's this invitation to always come back in love, in joy at our conversion back to him. Every time we turn back to him, all of heaven rejoices every time a sinner repents, right? God is gentle and soft and inviting, and he's always asking for us to let him into our lives deeper, to let him come in and let him as the divine physician to heal us, to fix our brokenness, because we are all so broken and we need the Lord so desperately, because none of us can do it by ourselves. We all need God's grace, because salvation is a supernatural thing, okay? We cannot do that. We need the Lord for that, and we need what he has shared with us, all the graces and gifts, the church, the sacraments, all the truths, etc., that God has shared with us. So the next time that we get into that situation where maybe we've given in to temptation and we've fallen into sin, let's not listen to the demons, because they've corrupted us that far. Let us not let them break us down even further. Let us not allow them to put us into a state of despair and a state of deeper sin and a state of turning further and further away from God. No, brothers and sisters, when we fall, let us not fall into that. Instead, let us reach back to the Lord like a little child who falls down, trips and falls or tips over on their bike, skins their knee. Let us cry out to God for help, and let him lift us up and kiss our cheek and bandage our wounds. Let him put us back on our feet and guide us on the path, on the way that he has set for us, to joy, to peace, to freedom, to eternal life. If you'd like to receive more Passionately Catholic content, be sure to subscribe and click that bell icon so YouTube has to tell you every time we share more info. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon.